Your Honor, before you pronounce that sentence, I need to make one phone call. The words hung in the courtroom like smoke from a fired gun. Judge Harrison Whitfield's face twisted with the kind of disgust usually reserved for something scraped off a shoe. The 17-year-old black teenager standing before him in an orange jumpsuit had the audacity to speak without permission. In this courtroom. His courtroom. The same courtroom where 3 generations of Whitfields had dispensed what they called justice in rural Georgia. The public defender, a tired woman named Sarah Chen, who'd been assigned the case 48 hours ago, hadn't even finished her closing statement. She'd tried, God knows she'd tried, but the evidence was overwhelming. Marcus Thompson, honor student turned drug dealer according to the prosecution, faced life without parole under the state's 3-strike law. Never mind that his first 2 strikes were for stealing food when he was 14 and a schoolyard fight where he defended his sister. Never mind that the drugs found in his car during a routine traffic stop were in a sealed evidence bag that somehow nobody could explain. "You'll speak when spoken to, boy." The word dripped with centuries of venom. The packed courtroom shifted uncomfortably. Someone in the gallery started recording on their phone, despite the bailiff's earlier warnings. Judge Whitfield's neck flushed red above his collar, the same tell he'd had for 30 years on the bench. "I've heard enough from you people today, trying to explain away your crimes with sob stories about poverty and discrimination." Marcus stood straighter. His mother, Denise Thompson, sobbed quietly in the front row, clutching her youngest daughter's hand. They'd driven 14 hours from Detroit when Marcus was arrested 6 months ago during what was supposed to be a college visit to Morehouse. The basketball scholarship that would have changed everything was gone now. Everything was gone now. Except for one thing Judge Whitfield didn't know. The morning had started at 5 a.m. in the county jail. Marcus hadn't slept. How could he? Sarah Chen had visited the night before, her eyes already apologetic. The case was unwinnable, she'd said. The prosecutor, District Attorney Carl Morrison, had political ambitions. He needed this conviction. A dangerous black drug dealer taken off the streets played well in certain circles, especially when that drug dealer was from up north, invading their peaceful community with urban crime. The jail cell was 8 by 10 feet of concrete and regret. Marcus had counted the cinder blocks, 342. He'd memorized the graffiti. "Tommy was here 2019. Jesus saves, but the judge doesn't. 20 to life for being black." That last one hit different now. The breakfast tray sat untouched. Powdered eggs and what they claimed was toast but looked like cardboard. The orange jumpsuit itched. Everything itched when you couldn't scratch away the injustice crawling under your skin. Down the hall, he could hear Deputy Richards laughing with the morning shift, talking about their weekend plans, talking about the conviction party Morrison was planning at the country club. They'd already printed the campaign posters. Morrison, keeping our streets safe. With Marcus's mugshot in the corner, the dangerous drug dealer. Never mind that Marcus had never touched drugs in his life. Never mind that his tox screen was clean. Never mind that 3 witnesses put him at a college tour when the drugs were supposedly purchased. The evidence was laughable if you looked closely. The traffic stop happened 2 miles from the police station. The dashboard camera mysteriously malfunctioned. The officer, Deputy Kyle Richards, claimed he smelled marijuana, but no marijuana was found. Just a bag of cocaine that had police evidence tape already on it. From a case 3 counties over, a case that had been closed 2 years ago. But none of that mattered when the judge and the prosecutor golfed together every Sunday, Marcus had watched his mother age 10 years in 6 months. She'd spent everything on lawyers before settling for the public defender. $47,000. Their life savings, the retirement fund, even the emergency fund hidden in the coffee can above the refrigerator. The first lawyer, some hotshot from Atlanta, had taken $30,000 and disappeared after the preliminary hearing. Said the case was unwinnable. Said Marcus should take a plea. 25 to life instead of life without parole. As if there was a difference when you're 17. She'd called everyone she knew. Every cousin. Every church member. Every old friend from college. The calls got shorter as the months went on. People had their own problems. People couldn't believe Marcus could be innocent. Where there's smoke, there's fire, they said. But they didn't see the matches in Deputy Richards's hand. She'd even called her ex-husband, Marcus's father, for the first time in 5 years. The conversation had been brief, painful. James Mitchell was in the middle of confirmation hearings. The first black attorney general nominee in United States history couldn't have a drug dealer's son. The optics, his handler had said. The fucking optics. Marcus had heard his mother crying after that call. The kind of crying that comes from the bones, from the place where hope goes to die. Marcus had legally changed his name when he turned 16, from Marcus Mitchell to Marcus Thompson, his mother's maiden name, a name that meant something, a name that carried the weight of his grandfather who'd marched with King, his grandmother who'd integrated her high school in Birmingham. Not the name of a man who'd chosen career over family, who'd sent checks but never showed up, who'd missed every basketball game, every science fair, every moment that mattered. Your Honor, Sarah Chen stood, her voice shaking slightly. My client has the constitutional right to contact his family before sentencing. One phone call, that's all he's asking. Judge Whitfield's smile was cold. Counselor, your client should have thought about his family before he decided to poison our community with drugs. Motion denied. He picked up his gavel, ready to pronounce the sentence that would end Marcus Thompson's life before it really began. That's when Marcus pulled out the phone. Not a contraband phone, but his own iPhone, sitting on the defense table the whole time. Evidence item number 47, never examined because the prosecutor said it wasn't relevant. Sarah Chen's eyes widened. She hadn't seen him palm it during her closing statement. The bailiff stepped forward, hand moving to his weapon. I'm calling my father, Marcus said, his voice carrying across the courtroom with a clarity that made everyone freeze. James Mitchell, the Attorney General of the United States of America. The silence was perfect, pure. The kind of silence that happens when the world shifts on its axis. Judge Whitfield's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The court reporter's fingers hovered over her keys. Someone in the gallery whispered, "Holy shit," and nobody even turned to look. Marcus dialed. The phone rang once, twice, then a voice, deep and familiar despite the years of absence. Marcus? What's wrong? Your mother called yesterday, but... Dad. The word cost Marcus everything to say. I'm in Judge Harrison Whitfield's courtroom in Cullman County, Georgia. I'm about to be sentenced to life in prison for drugs that were planted on me. The entire courtroom is listening on speaker. I need you to know that Deputy Kyle Richards, District Attorney Carl Morrison, and Judge Harrison Whitfield conspired to frame me. I have it all recorded on my phone. Every conversation they had in the holding cell next to mine, thinking I was asleep. The Attorney General's voice changed, shifted from concerned father to the man who'd prosecuted 17 corruption cases before his appointment. Marcus, is Judge Whitfield there? Can he hear me? Yes, sir. Marcus held the phone higher. The bailiff had frozen mid-step, looking at Judge Whitfield for guidance that wasn't coming. Judge Whitfield, this is Attorney General James Mitchell. I'm ordering you to halt all proceedings immediately. Federal marshals are already en route to your courthouse. They left Atlanta 45 minutes ago when my son's mother called me yesterday with concerns about judicial misconduct. I suggest you step down from the bench. Now. Judge Whitfield's face had gone from red to purple to a concerning shade of white. You can't. This is my courtroom. This is state jurisdiction. You have no authority. Harrison. The Attorney General's voice cut through the protest like a blade. I have a recorded conversation of you telling District Attorney Morrison that you were going to, and I quote, teach that uppity boy a lesson about coming down here thinking he's better than us. That's a federal hate crime. That's conspiracy to violate civil rights. That's deprivation of rights under color of law. You're looking at 20 years federal time. Minimum. The court reporter was typing frantically now. The person recording in the gallery had stood up for a better angle. District Attorney Morrison was sliding toward the exit, but 2 FBI agents were already walking through the doors. They'd been sitting in the parking lot, waiting for the signal that Marcus's father had promised would come. Dad, Marcus said, his voice breaking slightly. They were going to destroy my life because I'm black. Because I was driving through their town with Michigan plates. Because I had a Morehouse acceptance letter in my pocket. I know, son. I know. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry I wasn't there. I'm sorry it took this to bring me back, but I'm here now. The Attorney General paused. Judge Whitfield, are you still on the bench? The judge was standing now, his robe suddenly looking like a costume rather than a symbol of authority. I demand a lawyer. I'm not saying anything else. That's the first smart thing you've said today, James Mitchell replied. Marcus, son, put Sarah Chen on the phone. I need to speak with your attorney about the federal habeas corpus petition we're filing in exactly 60 seconds. Sarah Chen took the phone with trembling hands. The FBI agents were reading Judge Whitfield his rights. District Attorney Morrison was already in handcuffs. Deputy Kyle Richards, who'd been waiting to testify about Marcus's threatening behavior during the arrest, was being escorted out by federal marshals who'd been investigating him for 6 months for civil rights violations in 12 other cases. Marcus's mother had stopped crying. She was standing now, moving toward her son, as the bailiff, confused and leaderless, didn't stop her. She wrapped Marcus in her arms as Sarah Chen rapidly took notes from the Attorney General. Her public defender exhaustion replaced by the energy of a lawyer watching justice actually happen for once. Your Honor, Sarah Chen said to the empty bench, loud enough for the recording gallery to hear. I move for immediate dismissal of all charges against my client based on prosecutorial misconduct, judicial bias, and violation of my client's 4th, 5th, and 14th Amendment rights. The senior FBI agent, a black woman named Special Agent Johnson who'd driven down from Atlanta with barely concealed satisfaction, spoke up. Ms. Chen, Judge Whitfield is no longer presiding. The federal government is taking over this case. All charges against Marcus Thompson are dropped pending federal investigation. Mr. Thompson, you're free to go. Free to go. 3 words that seemed impossible 10 minutes ago. Marcus looked at the phone in his hand, his father still on the line. Dad? You still there? I'm here, Marcus. I'm driving down now. I'll be there in 2 hours. We have a lot to talk about. Yeah, Marcus said, watching Judge Whitfield being led away in the handcuffs that were supposed to be his future. We do. The courtroom erupted. The gallery couldn't contain itself anymore. Someone started clapping, then everyone was applauding. The court reporter was crying. Sarah Chen was being hugged by other public defenders who'd rushed in when they heard what was happening. This wasn't just about Marcus anymore. This was about every defendant who'd stood before Judge Whitfield and received injustice disguised as law. Marcus's mother held his face in her hands. "You recorded them? All this time you had evidence?" Marcus nodded. "My phone was in the evidence box, but it was still recording. They never checked it because they thought I was just another dumb kid from Detroit. They talked about everything, not just my case. Dozens of cases. Years of setting up young black men, taking bribes from private prisons, destroying lives for profit and hate." Special Agent Johnson approached. "Mr. Thompson, we'll need that phone as evidence, but I want you to know what you did today was brave, incredibly brave." "No," Marcus said, handing over the phone. "What I did today was survive. What happens next, that's what matters." 6 months later, the Cullman County Courthouse had a new judge, the first black judge in its history. Judge Sarah Chen, promoted from public defender after her work exposing the corruption that ran deeper than anyone imagined. The swearing-in ceremony was standing room only. Marcus was in the front row. He'd driven down from Atlanta, missing his constitutional law midterm, but Professor Williams understood. Everyone understood now. The investigation had revealed everything. 17 convictions overturned in the first month, 43 cases reopened by month 3, 127 cases under federal review by month 6. The pattern was always the same. Young black men. Traffic stops with malfunctioning cameras. Evidence that didn't match the chain of custody logs. Public defenders given impossible caseloads. Judges who'd already decided guilt before the trial started. Judge Harrison Whitfield was serving 25 years in federal prison. Not in the minimum security camp he'd expected. Not with the white-collar criminals who played tennis and traded stock tips. General population, where his fellow inmates knew exactly who he was, what he'd done, how many lives he'd destroyed with his gavel. The letters from inside were pathetic, begging for protective custody, claiming cruel and unusual punishment. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The man who'd shown no mercy was learning what justice really meant. His first week inside, someone had recognized him. Not hard to do when your face had been on every news channel for a month straight. Judge Whitfield? The one who sent my brother up for 30 years on a dime bag that wasn't even his? The conversation that followed wasn't pleasant. The infirmary report listed a broken nose, 3 cracked ribs, and a concussion. The guards had taken their time responding. Paperwork delays, they said. System glitches. The same excuses Whitfield had accepted when black defendants complained about abuse. District Attorney Carl Morrison cooperated with federal authorities in exchange for a reduced sentence, 15 years instead of 30. His testimony was a masterclass in corruption. The private prison kickbacks, $50,000 per conviction. The quotas, 20 young black men per quarter. The meetings at the country club where they'd joke about their harvest, like they were picking cotton instead of destroying lives. Morrison's wife filed for divorce before he finished testifying, took the kids, took the house, took everything except the shame. Marcus Thompson was finishing his freshman year at Morehouse College, full scholarship reinstated with a formal apology from the state of Georgia. He was studying law, surprising no one. His relationship with his father was complicated, would always be complicated, but they talked every Sunday. James Mitchell had established a federal task force on judicial corruption, with a special focus on racial bias in sentencing. He'd named it the Marcus Initiative, saying in a press conference that sometimes it takes almost losing everything to understand what really matters. But the most important change happened in that courtroom, in that moment when a 17-year-old boy refused to accept injustice. The video of Marcus calling his father had been viewed 18 million times. It sparked a movement. Young defendants started recording. Lawyers started pushing harder. Judges started remembering that they served justice, not their own prejudice. Denise Thompson was interviewed on national television, asked how she felt about that day. She said something that became a rallying cry. They thought my son was nobody. They thought he was just another statistic. They forgot that every child is somebody's everything, and sometimes that somebody has the power to make the world pay attention. The reporter asked Marcus the same question during his valedictorian speech at Morehouse 4 years later. He stood at the podium, looking out at an audience that included his mother, his father, Sarah Chen, now a federal judge, and Special Agent Johnson, now the head of the FBI's Civil Rights Division. His answer was simple. They gave me a life sentence that day. They just didn't realize it would be a life sentence dedicated to making sure what happened to me never happens to another innocent person again. Every time someone assumes that justice is automatic, that the system works, I want them to remember that I was 40 seconds away from prison for life. 40 seconds. If I hadn't made that call, if my father hadn't answered, if those FBI agents hadn't already been investigating, I'd be gone. How many others didn't have those 40 seconds? How many others didn't have a father who could make the world stop and listen? That's why I'm here. That's why I'll spend my life in the law. Because justice isn't just blind. Sometimes it's deaf and mute too. And someone needs to make it hear. Someone needs to make it speak. The standing ovation lasted 10 minutes, but Marcus wasn't looking at the crowd. He was looking at his phone, at a text from a kid in Texas whose case he'd been following. Another suspicious traffic stop, another planted evidence bag, another judge with a reputation. Marcus smiled. He had work to do. The system that tried to destroy Marcus Thompson had created its own worst enemy, a brilliant legal mind with a personal understanding of injustice, the connections to fight it, and the determination to never let anyone else stand alone in a courtroom facing a life sentence for the crime of driving while black. They'd tried to give him life in prison. Instead, they'd given him a life's purpose. The Marcus Initiative expanded beyond anything James Mitchell had initially imagined. Within 18 months, it had offices in 37 states, 4,000 cases under review, 1,200 convictions already overturned. The initiative didn't just investigate judicial corruption. It provided immediate legal support for defendants facing suspicious charges. The hotline received 300 calls a day, each one a potential Marcus Thompson, each one a life hanging in the balance of a system that too often confused law with power. Marcus himself became the face of reform, not by choice at first. The speaking requests were overwhelming. Every law school, every civil rights organization, every church that had watched their young men disappear into the system. He said yes to all of them at first. Detroit, Chicago, Birmingham, Jackson. Small towns where the only difference between 1950 and 2024 was that the lynching was done with legal briefs instead of rope. The speech at Howard Law School was the one that went viral. Not the whole speech, just 47 seconds where Marcus's voice broke, where he talked about the moment in that jail cell when he'd considered taking his own life. Better to die on his own terms than live in a cage for something he didn't do. The guards had put him on suicide watch after they found him testing the strength of the bedsheets. Not because they cared, because a dead defendant before trial meant paperwork. Questions. Investigations. "I stood on that bed," Marcus had said to an auditorium so quiet you could hear hearts breaking. "Sheet in my hands. 23 minutes before my mother's visiting hours. And I thought about her walking in to find out her son was gone. Not to prison, just gone. And I couldn't do that to her. So I lived. Not for me, for her. And it turns out that was enough. Just barely enough, but enough." The transformation of Cullman County became a case study at Harvard, a blueprint for reform that other jurisdictions reluctantly followed. The new prosecutor, Angela Washington, had been a civil rights attorney before taking the job. Her first act was to open all case files to federal review. Her second was to establish a conviction integrity unit. Her third was to personally apologize to every wrongfully convicted defendant she could find. Some accepted, some didn't. Some were beyond apologies, lost to suicide or violence in prisons they should never have entered. And that purpose was making sure that what happened in Judge Whitfield's courtroom became impossible in every courtroom in America. The legislation passed 3 years after Marcus's case, the Thompson-Mitchell Justice Reform Act, mandatory recording of all interrogations, independent review of all evidence, federal oversight for any jurisdiction with patterns of racial disparity in sentencing, body cameras that couldn't be turned off, dashboard cameras with triple redundancy, evidence lockers with biometric tracking. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever was, but it was better. Some would say Marcus was lucky, that if his father hadn't been who he was, none of this would have happened. But luck had nothing to do with Marcus recording those conversations. The phone had been in airplane mode, recording everything, hidden in his mattress during searches, recording through the vents when Judge Whitfield visited the jail to explain how things work around here. Recording when Deputy Richards bragged about the evidence planting. Recording when Morrison detailed the private prison money. 27 hours of recordings that became the foundation of the federal case. Luck had nothing to do with him keeping his composure when Judge Whitfield called him boy. The word that had made his grandfather march. The word that had made his grandmother sit at lunch counters while people poured coffee on her head. The word that carried centuries of weight designed to make black men small. Marcus had heard that word and grown taller. Stood straighter. Looked Whitfield in the eye like the equal he'd always been, but was never allowed to show. Luck had nothing to do with the courage it took to make that call, knowing it might be the last free choice he ever made. That wasn't luck. That was brilliance meeting opportunity, courage meeting injustice, and a young man refusing to become another statistic in a system designed to erase him. It was years of watching his mother fight for everything they had. Years of learning that dignity wasn't something anyone could take from you. It was something you carried in your spine, in your voice, in the way you refused to break even when they had all the power, and you had none. The reunion with his father had been complicated, televised, because everything was now. James Mitchell had walked into that courthouse 2 hours after the phone call, and the cameras were waiting. The hug was real, though. The tears were real. The whispered, "I'm sorry," was real. The work they'd do together over the next years was real. Complicated fathers and complicated sons finding a way forward through the work of making sure other fathers and sons weren't separated by a system that saw them as statistics instead of souls. Marcus graduated from Morehouse summa cum laude, Yale Law after that. Clerked for the first black woman Chief Justice. Could have had any job he wanted, any firm, any salary. Chose instead to return to Georgia, to open a practice in Cullman County, in the same building where Sarah Chen had worked as a public defender. The nameplate on the door read, Thompson Justice Law. Everyone deserves a fighting chance. His first client was a kid named Jamal, 17. Same age Marcus had been. Traffic stop, mysterious drugs, malfunctioning camera, different deputies, same game. But this time, Jamal had called the Marcus Initiative hotline from the back of the police car. This time, federal observers were in the courtroom before the arraignment. This time, the evidence was independently tested and found to be sugar packets wrapped in plastic. This time, the deputy was the one in handcuffs. What would you have done in that courtroom? Would you have had the presence of mind to record your captors? Would you have had the courage to make that call? Would you have stood tall when they tried to make you small? Comment below and share this story, because somewhere right now, another Marcus Thompson is standing in another courtroom, and they need to know that justice, real justice, is possible, even when it seems like the whole system is against you. Even when the judge, the prosecutor, and the arresting officer have already decided your fate. Even when all you have is 40 seconds and a phone call. Sometimes that's enough to change everything. Sometimes that's enough to change the world.